Hello, and welcome to the CUD Hub podcast. I'm Arthi, and I'll be your host. Joining us today is CUD's very own Dr. Firuz Kamalov, Associate Professor. Today, we will be talking about a recently held workshop about the practical guide on using GPT-4 for research and development. Welcome, Dr. Firuz.
Thank you.
Dr. Firuz, before we delve into the questions about the workshop and the topic, could you perhaps give us a bit of introduction about yourself?
Sure. My name is Firuz Kamalov. I'm from Tajikistan. I did my undergraduate and graduate work in the US. My main focus of study is mathematics, but being part of the School of Engineering for the last 15 years almost, has pushed me towards more applied fields. And so now, the last 5 years, I have also spent a lot of time working in AI and machine learning.
Wow, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing that. Now, Dr. Firuz, I have one more question. Just out of curiosity, many people, and I'm not quoting any statistics over here, may find math, complex, complicated, hard to understand. It's the world of numbers. What drove you into that field? What caused you to be so passionate about the subject?
My parents always emphasized math, and they pushed me to study math, and I think that's probably normal for most parents.
That is true.
And somehow I gotten good at math, and then usually and I wasn't actually so good in other subjects. Like I really didn't like grammar or writing, and so normally when you're good at something, you tend to like it. When it comes easy and it gives you, when you solve questions and you see others struggle with, gives you confidence and you start liking it. And so it just slowly developed into a profession, a career.
Perfect. Thank you. So moving on to the workshop. Could you tell us a bit about the workshop? Who was it for? What was the main takeaways or aim of this workshop?
So the workshop was about introducing practical skills and showing practical examples of how you can use GPT to do research and also other tasks. I think many people are aware of the power of these language models, because it's not just GPT. There are a number of different models. Everybody's trying to build their own model. But GPT sort of stands out a little bit than the other ones. But I think most of us are aware of the power and the capabilities of these models, but maybe not as much as they actually exist. Especially because the capabilities, they evolve essentially on a monthly basis. On a monthly basis, they come up with some new trick, new advancement. So I think even though people know that these things work well, maybe not everyone realizes the full potential of these things. So the goal of the workshop to try to highlight the full range of the capabilities of these models and try to relate it to faculty research and how these capabilities can be geared to save time. The goal was not to replace research, of course, but you can use these models to accelerate your research, and a lot of mundane things can be accelerated using these tools. So the idea was to give exposure to the full range of capabilities and keep the focus on tasks that are related to research.
Right. So I'm going to take a step back over here. I know we've mentioned GPT-4 a few times, but for those who may not know, what is GPT-4 exactly, and why is it so significant in research? Because, every day we hear AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, OpenAI. We hear all these terms being thrown around. So what is it exactly?
So GPT, first of all, it stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And the key word there is the transformer, which is a language model which was ironically developed by Google in 2017. They developed this model with the aim of improving language translation.
Interesting.
And it worked really well for language translation. But at the time, again, this was 2017, the authors didn't realize the full potential of what they did. Otherwise, if it were Google and they knew that it's such a huge deal, they would have, taken care of business and they would have been number one right now.
True.
But they didn't realize this. And that's the great thing about research. People do research and they share their ideas online and anybody can use them. But anyway, so in 2017, a team from Google published their research paper that introduced the transformer model, and that really revolutionized the whole field, not just in language processing, but the entire AI field. Now everybody's using this transformer model. So GPT is one of the versions that use transformer model. You have other versions, like you mentioned, Gemini is good. There's also Claude, which is also a very popular and very powerful model. You also have the Llama model from Facebook, which is the open version. Most of these other guys are commercial and you have no access to the details of the model, but Facebook has a very powerful version that's open source, so you have access to the model and you can tweak it around. Anyway, so you have all these models that are based on the transformer idea. The difference between these models is how they, what kind of data they use to train the model. Because the way it works is you have a model, like a transformer model, and then you take a bunch of data, and then you run the data through the model. And when you run the data through the model tries to capture information from the data. And you do it several times. So it's like reading a book. Like you just read the book once, you get some understanding of what's going on, and then you read it the second time, you get a better understanding. And so you do it, these models do it for millions of times. So you have huge amounts of data, usually close to the entire text that's available on the internet. So you take basically everything that's out there, that humans ever created, basically very close to it.
That's vast.
Yeah, it's huge amount of data, and then you run it through the model. And when you run it, the models are also huge. For example, the Llama model, it's open source, so we have information about Llama model. We don't have the details of the models for the other ones, but for the Llama we have. So for example, for the Llama 3 model, they had 20,000 supercomputers. So not just your regular office computers, but supercomputers. So you get 2,000 supercomputers running in parallel. So they're working nonstop for 21 days in parallel together. So crunching all this data that's available on the internet. And
that too real time, right? This is something that could take human beings years to complete or accomplish, or is this all real time? Does it take a long time?
So you basically have 20,000 supercomputers.
Right.
You turn them on at the same time, and then you have all this data that represents everything that's available on the internet.
This somehow feels like a science fiction movie.
Yeah, you run it through all these computers, and the computers keep running for 21 days without stopping. You cannot turn it off. If you turn it off, the whole thing breaks and you have to do it again. Wow. So it's a very tricky business. Anyways, so in the end, these models, they capture essential information from the data that was given to, and then they're able to use this information to generate text and generate images. To put it in a basic way, the models, they take a sequence of words as an input and the output the next likely word in the sequence. So for example, if you input today is hot and I feel blank,
Yeah.
then it will put in the blank spot, it will put I feel thirsty, and it will come up with the word thirsty based on all this data that it has seen, that it has studied during the training process. And so then what happens now, you append the word thirsty to the original input. So today is hot and I feel thirsty, and that becomes your new input. And then it generates the next word based on that new input. And that's how it ends up generating these long passages. It's always one word at a time. You generate the next word and you append it to the previous input, and that becomes your new input. You again give it to the model and it generates the next word. And even if you ever pay attention how the text is generated in GPT, you see it comes up word by word. It doesn't just like spit out the whole text at the same time, because that's how it works. It generates one word at a time, which is actually very different if you think about it than humans. We normally, when we speak, we usually generate sentences at a time. I think most of us don't think of the next word. We sort of spit out a sentence and then we think of the next sentence. So that's very different than these models, who they think in terms of words, and not even most of them. They don't even think in terms of words. They think in terms of what's called tokens, and tokens can be commas, periods. So that's how they think. They think sort of this token at a time, and a token is either a word or a punctuation mark. Yeah, so it's
everything matters.
Yeah,
what you put in.
And there's a lot of one last thing I want to mention. And this is good and this is one of the reasons why I love, as a mathematician, I love GPT and all these models. When the data goes through those computers and the model is trying to extract information and knowledge from the data, what's really happening there is a lot of calculus.
That was my next question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was actually my next question to you. As a professor, of mathematics, like calculus is, I would say, one of the fundamentals in mathematics as well. How have, AI and technology, how have these advancements influenced the way calculus is being taught now? Or what have changed? Or what has changed in the field of calculus?
Well, you can't really change anything in calculus. 2 plus 2 is still equals 4.
Yes.
No matter what happens, no matter how much the world changes around us, 2 plus 2 is still equals 4.
It'll always be 4, yes.
But what did happen was because there's so much calculus that takes place inside these models, because when you basically during this sort of quote unquote training process, when they read the data and they try to extract the information from the data, what happens is you have something called a loss function, and the model is trying to minimize the loss function. Right. And minimization is a classical problem in calculus. And what you do is you calculate partial derivatives, and then you apply gradient descent in order to find the minimum value of the function. And that's exactly what these models do. So if you look at the heart of these models, there's a ton of calculus happening. And so as a mathematician, it's always cool to see a new application of calculus, especially such a powerful application. And so that helps me motivate students to pay a little bit more attention when we talk about the product rule and the quotient rule and partial derivatives. So when you say that, guys, if you want to build the next AI model, you have to know this. This is what makes it go. This is the engine of the AI.
Of course.
So that kind of helps me motivate the students in my calculus classes. But I mean, calculus is still calculus.
You're right. 2 plus 2 will always be 4. Yeah. Speaking about calculus, you've talked about generating data. In what areas of research do you see GPT-4 having the biggest impact?
Well, I think it's very, right at this, it's hard to tell, to be honest, what will happen in the future. and things are changing so quickly. I think no one in the world can tell you how exactly these models will progress and where the greatest impact would be. I can tell you at this stage, its biggest weakness is math. Even though, so basically the way you can think of the GPT is as a very smart undergraduate student. So take a super smart undergraduate student, and that's the level of GPT, and it's at that level in every subject. So if you ask it a question at the level of chemistry, and if you think that a really smart undergraduate student can do it, then GPT can also do it. If you have a question in math and you think that a smart undergraduate student can do it, then GPT can do it. But among all, and so that's more or less the level of expertise across all subjects. But the weakest point is math. It's because math is not just about text generation. You really have to think, and it's a very nuanced field, very nuanced, and that makes it very tricky for these models to handle. Its biggest strength is, of course, writing. So fields that require a lot of writing, a lot of reports, that would benefit. It's very good with analyzing data. So fields that require data analysis will benefit from it. Maybe like management fields where you have all kinds of numbers you need to crunch and then sort of try to extract some useful information from the numbers. So any field that requires data analysis will benefit. Any field that requires a lot of writing will benefit. That's sort of my take.
Great. So you also briefly mentioned about how it makes it easy for research and papers. From a researcher's perspective, how does it make it easier? And in your perhaps in your words, how does it make it easier for researchers to write their papers and reports? That you mentioned data analysis being simplified in a sort of way for management, but how does it help researchers? Or how can they?
So one way it can help is by writing the research paper. So you do research, you come up with something new, you run your experiment. So you finish all the technical part, and then the last step, in a way, is to report this research. You have to write a paper that describes your research, that describes your findings. So you actually have to write. So that's the part where it can help. For example, I am a terrible writer, and so what I would do is I will have my first draft written by myself, and then I would ask maybe GPT to check the any grammar issues, any language issues, and help me with editing process. So that's one place where it can be very useful, especially if you're a non-native speaker. It will help you to clean up these tiny small language problems in your writing. So that's one thing. So that saves a lot of time. You don't have to. It's basically your buddy who has lots of free time and is really good in English, and he can help you out. To fix your writing. Second avenue where it really helps is in coding. So if you're working in a field that requires a lot of coding, so for example, in AI, we do a lot of coding. And coding, I think you can ask anyone, is a headache because there are so many commands that you have to memorize, and the way things are done. Like you have to do things specifically in the right way in order for your code to run. You can write like a 10-page code, and you just forget a comma in the right place. You put a period in the wrong place, then none of that works. So you'd spend 2 days writing something, and just because of a silly comma, it does not work. It just breaks. So it's very coding is very nitpicky, and there's rules that you have to follow, and there are tons of rules, and there are many commands because there are many packages that you have to know. So it takes a lot. Even something pretty straightforward. It takes time to figure out, just because the vocabulary is so huge. So I would, for example, I was like, okay, how do I do this? So I have to Google it. How do I do this? And then I do it. And then I have to think about, okay, how do I do this? And then, so something that would usually take me maybe 30 minutes would be done in 30 seconds by GPT. So because it's really amazing in coding. So you can ask it to do something in terms of coding, write your piece of code, and it can do it. You
saving a lot of time.
Yeah, exactly.
Fast tracking.
Yeah, it doesn't really do something that's impossible. Like, it doesn't do anything that you can't do. Like, you can't do all of this, but it just saves you time.
Right.
You know? One thing you do have to be careful is you always have to double check. You always have to double check, because it can make a mistake. It makes mistakes. It makes mistakes.
I have heard many people talk about it. Many articles have
So
come out.
It's easy to because it looks really impressive. Like, when you look at it, looks very professional, looks very fancy. So it's very easy to feel like there are no problems with it, but it does make mistakes, and it's very important you double check. You always have to double check.
Humans who make mistakes. AI can make mistakes too.
Yeah, AI can definitely make mistakes. So coding is another place where it can help you save a lot of time. So I think in my opinion, those are the two main places where GPT can help you save time in your research and accelerate your research.
So then, are there any challenges, limitations that researchers should be aware of on any other terms while doing their research, or while using GPT in their research?
Yeah. So, like I said, GPT makes mistakes.
Right.
Makes mistakes, and you always, even in writing, you have to double check what it's doing. For example, if you ask it to do a literature review, so you would say do a literature review on global warming. So it's supposed to go out and look at some articles that talk about global warming and summarize those articles for you. That's what it's supposed to do. So what it would do, it would come up with fake articles. It will just make up an article. It will say, like, there was this article in the newspaper, but there is no such article. And it will say, in that article, they said, this and this and that, but that article does not exist. And that's actually a very common problem in GPT and other models. They can easily make up facts. So when it comes to research and when it comes to doing literature review, because I know a lot of people try to use GPT for literature review, because that's something that takes a lot of time. You have to, search these papers, you have to read them, and so it takes a lot of time. It can take, a couple of weeks. So it's very tempting to ask GPT to do it for you, but very often it will make up fake papers. And, if you don't double check, and then if someone finds out about it later on, it will be very, very embarrassing to have a bunch of fake papers in your manuscript. So that's something that you really have to watch out for. And I also mentioned in coding, it makes mistakes in coding.
Right.
Even though code may run, it doesn't crash. It works, but it's not doing what it's supposed to do.
Right, and that could also have, effect on the findings of the research, completely impacting it negatively. So
the rule of thumb is always check.
Always check.
Always check, yeah.
So to our listeners who are interested in GPT-4 and using GPT-4 in their research, always fact check.
Yeah, always fact check. Always check everything.
Right.
That's my advice. And the other thing about checking is, there's the saying, use it or lose it. It's very, if you become overly reliant on GPT for writing, for coding, you will lose your own writing and coding skills.
Sure.
it's a fact. Like if I don't code for 2 months, I feel like I'm starting from scratch. So when you're checking, it doesn't replace the process of writing or coding completely, but it's still a level of it requires a level of effort and engagement in that process that helps you keep those skills a little bit fresh.
True.
So especially when you review coding, I would say it's like halfway like doing the coding itself. So you don't completely lose those skills. But if you just not doing any checking, not engaging in that, it's so easy to lose those skills. So
Right.
after a year of using GPT, you lose all your writing skills, all your coding skills, and it would be terrible.
So that's the second advice to our listeners. Use it or lose it.
Exactly.
Do you have one more piece of advice?
Well, I guess my last advice would be that there are many different options when it comes to language models. GPT-4 is probably the best option,
Okay.
but there are a lot of close seconds, and it's is very worth exploring those. For example, Claude has a model called Sonnet 3.5. It's a very good model. Gemini also has good models. For those of you who are sort of really hardcore about it, you may check out open source models like Llama 3. Llama, you can download the model on your computer, and you can change it to do things that are outside the box. So you can control it. You can give it your own voice. For example, you can make it to talk to you, and then you can customize it so it talks in your voice. So you can do with open source models, you have a full control of the model, and you can change then tweak it. You can fine tune it. So my advice is there, even though GPT is the most popular model, there are many other options as well.
Right.
So it's worth checking them out.
So 3 key advice from Dr. Firuz is always fact check, use it or lose it, and then try other sources outside GPT-4.
Definitely, yes. There are other options.
Perfect. Yeah. So thank you very much, Dr. Firuz, for joining us today and for sharing how GPT-4 is shaping research and development. And to our listeners, we hope this conversation has given you valuable insights into leveraging AI into your work. Thank you very much again, Dr. Firuz.
Thank
it
you
was
for
a
having
pleasure
me.
speaking with you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.